Welcome back to the Forged by Trust podcast. I'm your host, Robert Dreek. This episode today is dedicated to Memorial Day 2022. It is also the third in a three-part series entitled My Enemy, My Friend, with two very dear close friends, Jack Barsky, former KGB deep undercover officer, and Dan Hoffman, retired senior clandestine services officer for the CIA. This special episode is all about understanding the geopolitical challenges that we face around the world and our unique three-person optic on it based on our background, myself as a counterintelligence agent for the FBI, Jax from a deep undercover KGB operative, and Dan from a clandestine services officer who served in multiple high-risk areas around the world. One of the things that we do in this episode is draw the parallel between Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and Ronald Reagan in their ability to inspire nations. So, as such, I'm going to read a few of the most notable lines that Ronald Reagan spoke in recognition of Memorial Day during his time in office as our president. His impassioned speeches spoke of Americans winning their freedom with the sacrifices and the blood of the martyrs who died defending the nation. Reagan heaped praise on the families of martyrs and veterans. Here are some of the most memorable quotes by Ronald Reagan. May 26, 1983. I don't have to tell you how fragile this precious gift of freedom is. Every time we hear, watch, or read the news, we are reminded that liberty is a rare commodity in this world. Arlington National Cemetery, May 31st, 1982. The United States and the freedom for which it stands, the freedom for which they died, must endure and prosper. Their lives remind us that freedom is not bought cheaply. It has a cost. It imposes a burden. And just as they whom we commemorate were willing to sacrifice, so too must we, in a less final, less heroic way, be willing to give of ourselves. May 25th, 1981. Today, the United States stands as a beacon of liberty and democratic strength before the community of nations. We are resolved to stand firm against those who would destroy the freedoms we cherish. We are determined to achieve an enduring peace, a peace with liberty and with honor. This determination, this resolve, is the highest tribute we can pay to the many who have fallen in the service of our nation. Arlington National Cemetery, May 31st, 1982. Our goal is peace. We can gain that peace by strengthening our alliances, by speaking candidly about the dangers before us, and by assuring potential adversaries of our seriousness, by actively pursuing every chance of honest and fruitful negotiation. May 26, 1983. We owe this freedom of choice and action to those men and women in uniform who have served this nation and its interests in time of need. In particular, we are forever indebted to those who have given their lives that we might be free. I hope you all found those words inspiring and that you'll sit back, relax, reflect on them, as well as listen in to this great episode between myself, Jack, and Dan as we explain the challenges of the world around us today. Welcome to an exciting special episode of the Forged by Trust podcast. We're going to cover three hot topics in the world, and that is the world of intelligence, the geopolitical challenges around the world, as well as hopefully we'll get a little Vladimir Putin in here as well, because from our three backgrounds, you're going to get a lot of different optics, but all centered on one crucial thing, and that is protect the national security of the United States and our NATO allies. And as always, if you could leave a review, leave a like on your favorite podcasting platform, because likes and reviews get us the notice we need to get this great information out there so we can actually make a difference in the world. And as I always say, if we have at least one bit of information someone else could benefit from, shame on us for not getting it to us and not getting it to them, I should say. And so with that, I'm going to do a little round robin here so we can kind of get brief introduction. Again, if anyone's looking for a little more deeper dive on either Dan or Jack, please check out their podcast. And with that, Jack, why don't you give us a real brief introduction yourself? And with that introduction, give a little bit of your why and why you joined or were recruited by the KGB those years ago.
Career, this was never a plan of mine. I mean, the whole idea of becoming a spy or working in an intelligence agency never crossed my mind. I was going to be a college professor. My parents were teachers, and that was natural for me. I liked teaching. But, the KGB had other plans. They found me. They were looking candidates for, deep cover work. And good candidates for deep cover work weren't that easy to find. So they came to me, recruited me. It took about 18 months before they made the offer. And the reason I accepted the offer, and it was a tough decision, because you understand that when you go deep cover in another country, you lose your history, you lose your parents, you lose your friends, you lose everything. You got to start from scratch in another country with possibly another language and another culture. What really convinced me was a combination of adventurism. I've always been very adventurous and always wanted to, explore places and go places. And the other one, the most important one, was I was convinced that there would be communism would win the war of ideologies and eventually be established in the entire world. And I was going to be a hero by doing my part to accelerate that process.
And Jack, you bring out so many things I'd love to explore more with. And the one that I think you are the best expert on is the impact that propaganda has in someone's life, because you were a result of that. I mean, you are a hardcore supporter of communism because you were going to save the world on that. And then that transformation started happening, as happens a lot with the deep cover folks. When they go abroad, they start getting exposed to truth, and transparency will set you free, because that kind of seeing the rest of the world does that to you. With that, Dan, next, please.
Yeah. So my path to serving at CIA, a little bit different. I was very well aware as a kid growing up in Boston of a lot of the sacrifices my family had made. A lot of them had served in the military. My grandfather, my father's father, first one born in this country, he went to public schools, served in the Navy, and then he went to law school and opened up his own law practice, a family law practice in Boston. He went from having nothing. His parents had nothing. My great-grandfather was a photographer. My great-grandmother didn't work. But this was the freedom of opportunity we all enjoy in our country. And so I wanted to do my part and serve my country. And so I thought about my own path. At the time, the Cold War was raging, and intelligence played a big part in that. And so that was my path. I decided to apply to CIA and was thankful that I was granted an interview and then eventually was hired.
For myself, very much like Dan, we're pretty close in age. I grew up when, one of my heroes was Ronald Reagan. And he was very inspirational for me in my life, and service. I come from a family of service as well. My dad was a former Marine during Vietnam, and I wanted to be nothing but this great Navy pilot and astronaut, because people will ask, how did you wind up doing behavioral analysis? I failed at all the other things I wanted to do, but it was constantly service, because I went in the Marine Corps after the Naval Academy, and literally we had a recruiter from the FBI come to Parris Island, where I was serving as a company commander, and said, we think Marines make great FBI agents. And I had all these, public service jobs I could go into in corporate America. And I just wanted to continue my service to my country. And I got assigned to New York and did the whole thing. Yeah, Jack.
Sorry, finish up.
No, go ahead. No, everyone hears my story. So you mentioned
Ronald Reagan, that triggered something in my mind that illustrates my transition. When I came here, in the first few years I operated here, Reagan was president, and I was convinced the guy was an idiot. And now I think he's the best president we've had since the end of World War II.
It's funny thing about Reagan too. I love studying people's behaviors. And one of the things, again, I love it when we're going to talk about political figures, kind of putting your politics aside so you can kind of look at the individual and things they do and look at their strengths. One of Reagan's greatest strengths was his ability to forge trust using a lot of self-deprecating humor and a positive can-do attitude. I mean, he is just always positive, always making fun of himself. One of his greatest things he did, both on stage during the first State of the Union address and at everything, when he was first attacked by the Democrats for being too old for office, the first thing he did was start poking at his age. He validated the context of others. He didn't argue it. And he said, all right, next. And it went. Can you imagine today a politician agreeing with someone that's on the opposite side, it just doesn't happen. And
I mean,
so
do you remember the first debate with Vice President Mondale where he said, "I'm not going to take advantage of my opponent's youth," or something like that?
Yes,
And
I'm not going to take advantage of my use and inexperience, or hold it against them is what it was.
Yeah, I mean, it was just as you said, the way to do it. Now, I'll just tell you, taking that to today's world, when I talk about President Zelensky in Ukraine, as somebody I've seen his films. He was an excellent actor, and he understands how to get up in front of people and deliver a pithy statement, and rally his countrymen and women. If I were writing a dissertation or something, I would compare President Reagan and President Zelensky. There's a lot of worthy comparisons between the two.
Dan, you bring a great point there. And often people will say that remember growing up under Reagan, they used to try to criticize him that, he's just an actor, or he's good at communicating because he's an actor. And I always kind of countered that with the reversal. He's actually good at communicating because he's naturally good at communicating, and became an actor because he's good at communicating.
Right.
Because it's actually in his core, because you can't fake who you are, because both of you, especially, I mean, I did undercover work, but Jack lived it, and Dan, you did a lot more than I did as well. It's exhausting psychologically to be someone you're not for a period of time. And so our politicians, when they're on the campaign trail and they're trying to be someone they're not, they can't hold it for very long when they hit office. So you might see something on the campaign trail, but then when they're on office, if it's not who they are, it's going to completely fall apart. And so Reagan kept to that, and Zelensky's doing the same thing. And my question for both of you on this one is, I always talk about this dichotomy of power and leadership, and power is about self, and power and controlling things, and leadership is about being of service to others. And as patriots, as the three of us are, it's about serving our country and serving others and serving a greater good. But I wonder, in places like Ukraine, which I know they're not part of NATO because of corruption that's been in place in the past, and which is a power thing. And I know people can't get in positions of leadership without exercising power, because power is popularity. But then they make that transition. So Dan, in your assessment, and Jack too, when assessing Zelensky, would you see him, now he's a leadership guy. Do you think he's always been about leadership, or is it about power? Or how do you think that dichotomy plays out? And how will it play out, more importantly, for the future of Ukraine, you think, beyond this?
So I'll start with this, that I think that neither the United States nor Russia assessed that he would be the leader he became. But it was always there inside him. He was waiting, for the crisis to happen, for him to demonstrate that he had these extraordinary leadership qualities. And he's playing to his strengths. If you look at his May 9 Victory Day speech, walking down the streets of Kyiv, so different from Vladimir Putin's just kind of stoic wooden speech, looked very Soviet. But Zelensky, man of the people, calling out his courageous countrymen and women to keep up the fight against Russia. I mean, that's another thing he and President Reagan had in common. I mean, President Reagan built a consensus to counter the Soviet Union. You and I we all remember that there were many in our country who thought essentially we should appease the Soviet Union. And President Reagan was more about peace through strength. Zelensky has rallied not just his own countrymen and women, but also the rest of NATO. The West awakened us all from a post-Cold War slumber. Totally extraordinary. It was there inside him, but I don't even know that he knew it would actually be there when he needed it. And that's, to me, the most extraordinary part of this. One of the most extraordinary parts of this extraordinary fight that Ukraine is putting up is just the leadership you're seeing from President Zelensky. It is role model leadership we can all learn from.
It's dumbfounding to witness, and being a part of history and knowing what you're witnessing during it is I think, one of the greatest gifts we can have. And to your point, Dan, he has rallied NATO to a point that I've never seen or thought we would experience. And Jack, you were on the other side of the wall for a long time. For you, how do you see NATO's reaction? Was that shocking to you as well?
Absolutely, but particularly since I have some pretty strong ties to Germany. Was born and raised in Germany. The about face by a socialist type government in Germany with regard to spending more on the military and becoming a more active member of NATO was like, wow, where did this come from? Zelensky will most likely go into history as one of the greatest in the last few years. I just wanted to talk about your juxtaposition, power versus servitude.
And
that holds everywhere, actually. Yeah. Zelensky is serving his people by fundamentally he is the biggest target that Putin had and still has. So he might lose his life over this. And believe it or not, in communism it was the same way. You cannot lead effectively by being dictatorial, and so the leadership styles in East Germany were just as different as they are in the United States.
Yeah, it's dumbfounding to witness. And Dan, I know you spent times in the Baltics as well. Very familiar with it. I mean, you speak Estonian as well as Russian and numerous other languages. These recent moves that we've seen with Finland and Sweden looking to join NATO, was that something you predicted would happen? I mean, what's your take on that?
I never predicted. I lived in Finland and never could have predicted that the Finns, I mean, they are independent and stubbornly so. I never could have imagined that they would have wanted to be a part of some other security apparatus. They want to take care of themselves. That's the way they've always been. You know, they fought the Winter War and the continuation war, as they describe it, during World War II on their own. They were the ones responsible for maintaining their own, in contrast to some of the other nations that fell under Soviet influence after the war. But this is what Vladimir Putin has done. And we're going to talk a lot about the geopolitical ramifications of Putin's war in Ukraine. One of those is, you know, for Vladimir Putin's regime security, being linked up to China is a good thing because he's going to counter the West and he's going to be aligned with a similarly oriented dictator. But for Russia's economic future, it's really all about Europe. And there's one gas pipeline to China. They're not going to make up everything they're going to lose in their exports of hydrocarbons to the West. And the mass of the Russian population, especially given the numbers that are leaving, they don't want this. But Putin will portray it down the road as, well, NATO is at our doorstep now. The Baltic states and, you know, the other four members of the other members, there's 5 NATO members, you know, on Russia's border. And this is kind of sealing Russia's tilt now to Asia. It's always been a kind of a battle inside Russia for their soul. Is it Europe or is it Asia? And for Putin's regime security, it's got to be Asia. And it's only going to change once Putin is gone. But the West needs to be prepared, in my estimation at least, with an olive branch, that once Putin is gone and the fighting stops and Russia pays with money for all the damage they've caused and for the war crimes they've committed, that they can be welcomed back if their leadership is new and different and nothing like Vladimir Putin's. That's a long way from now. It's hard to imagine, but I think the challenge for our country and for NATO members is not to seal off Russia permanently. I don't think we want to do that.
I agree with that 100%. If only for the fact that Russia has almost half the nuclear weapons on the planet. That's the reason we have to respect them. Other than that, you know, Russia is number 11 or 12, at least with regard to gross national product. So that's like smaller than Texas.
Yeah, and we're already going down the geopolitical road. So absolutely, I think a big question that everyone's been asking, and I think this group has the best answer for it, and that is, so why did Putin do what he's doing? You know, like what's happening? You know, what worked? What didn't work? What did he expect to happen? Why didn't it happen? And we can then kind of blend it into intelligence, successes and failures on both sides that kind of made that happen. That is where our bailiwick is. So Dan, I'll start with you on all right. So why did Putin do what he's doing? Is he at battle with Ukraine or is he at battle with something else?
So let's start with that. Why is Ukraine an existential threat to Russia? Why does Putin say that it doesn't matter that Finland and Sweden are going to join NATO? Well, the reason why he said that is because he can't do anything to stop it. But Ukraine, you know, on Russia's border with a sizable Russian-speaking population, Putin cannot let Ukraine become a Western-oriented democracy. Ukraine wants to join NATO and the European Union, and that's what threatens Putin the most. He knows NATO's a defensive alliance. He knows that Ukraine had no potential to join NATO in the near term. There are too many countries that would have voted against it. But he cannot allow, you know, Ukraine for democracy to flourish because those ideas, liberty and freedom, the things we hold near and dear to our hearts, the things that are enshrined in the Constitution and Bill of Rights, that's what threatens Putin's regime security the most. And so he had to do away with Ukraine as a nation state. And it was such an existential threat that he launched this war. Now, what's fascinating to me is he made a massive intelligence failure. He failed to accurately to assess the capacity and the will of Ukraine to fight, as well as their leader, Zelensky. But you know something? We did the same thing. You know, I'm writing about this in an op-ed that will be out this week, but seminal moment of this conflict was when we offered Zelensky a plane. to evacuate him. And he said, no, I don't need a plane. I need ammunition. The fight is here. That sounds a lot to like Ronald Reagan, Winston Churchill, the greatest leaders. Zelensky knows how to deliver a pithy statement. That was his mission statement. The fight is here and I am here to fight. And God bless him. But we made the same mistake Vladimir Putin did. And imagine if he had taken that flight out. Counterfactual history. Maybe the war is over. Ukraine loses. And we face all of those threats from Vladimir Putin now having taken over Ukraine, installed a puppet government, which was his expectation to celebrate May 9 Victory Day with some puppet government, serving at his beck and call in Kyiv. And I feel pretty sure that there's a red team going on in the United States about how we got it wrong, but Russia doesn't have oversight. And the corruption is massive. This is the Potemkin village of the Russian military, where they supposedly take money to go buy stuff that they need. But nope, they go buy palatial estates on the Black Sea instead, or pocket the money. And that's what we're seeing, a hollowed out force in Russia. And it's much to the surprise of our own intel community, but I'm sure it's surprising Vladimir Putin in a not so positive way.
Yeah, go ahead, Jack.
When you mentioned corruption, I have a friend who was FSB. He worked in the investigative division that was investigating bank fraud. And he didn't want to participate in the corruption. There was money changing hands everywhere. And eventually, because he was an outsider, he had to run. And that's how he wound up in the United States. Russia is a through and through corrupt country.
Yeah, when I worked in New York and did counterintelligence in New York against the Russians, people would often ask me about Russian organized crime and does it work like La Cosa Nostra, like the Italians? And I go, no, it's actually just everyone. It's literally everyone. I mean, we used to watch, kind of talking about how insider this whole organization is. Lavrov, the current Minister of Foreign Affairs for Russia, was the ambassador to UN when I was there. He's been in there a long time. And I remember anytime they had a senior level officer come in, whether it's SVR or GRU or anything else, they had their thirds. They had to spend so much money because everyone was on the take in order to make things happen, because their budget for doing everything was so low that they actually had to skim money from everything else. I remember when they were doing a new renovation of the Russian residential complex, the big spy place in Riverdale, New York. It was hilarious listening in on all the calls that they were skimming from all the construction workers. I mean, they were just stealing left and right. And so there was organized crime. Everyone's organized crime. And it's just the way they did business. It was unbelievable. And that kind of brings us to what was shocking to me too is, one, you have Russia's and Putin's intelligence failure, whether they weren't collecting it or afraid to tell the boss it, or the boss wasn't hearing what they're telling them. And likewise on our side, it was kind of shocking to me that we got, and Dan, the three of us, we predicted something a little bit different at the beginning too, I think, with our intelligence. Like, why don't we have better intelligence? What is happening? Any ideas on that?
I'll just tell you from my experience. I mean, you and I have talked about this, how there's nothing certain in life. Some people like to say death and taxes. I'll refine that and say that I think the three of us are going to make it out of this podcast alive. And we're probably going to pay taxes, but hey, you never know how that's going to go.
I never know with Jack.
Said, the only thing that's certain to me is love. Like, I know I love my wife and kids. I'm 100% certain about that. The intel business, no, we're never certain. I mean, there's people involved. When we were hunting down bin Laden, I was serving in our headquarters at the time, and it was frustrating for our elected leaders, because we couldn't say for sure that bin Laden was actually in Abbottabad. And that's just the way it is. You can only get so far with it. But this isn't going to be looked upon as a colossal failure because it's turned out okay. Zelensky declined the ride out.
Yeah.
It would have been considered a colossal failure had he taken the ride out, although we might not have known about it, because if Ukraine had collapsed, if he left and Ukraine collapsed, we would have said, well, we were right.
Yeah.
So we would have precipitated the very intel failure that we were assessing. I mean, I know that's a bit hall of mirrors, complicated stuff, but at the end of the day, we know now, full transparency, we've had Director DNI of Real Haynes has testified on this, that we didn't get it right. And so we need to look at our collection and our analysis and see, like, where did we get it wrong? I think we probably overestimated Russia's capacity based on their relatively successful performances in Chechnya and in Georgia and in Syria. We underestimated the Ukrainians, but we shouldn't have, because we've been training them since Russia illegally annexed Crimea and invaded the Donbass. So there's a lot of introspection to be done on our side, and it's not going to happen in Russia. But the way they do it is they arrest the guy responsible. So the FSB officer, Sergei Beseda, head of the Fifth Service, he's arrested. And the intelligence collection now for Ukraine has been turned over to Russia's military intelligence, the GRU.
Yeah,
so that's
my
how
boys.
Putin does it. For us, we just say, hey, red team it, lessons learned, let's do better.
Yeah, I found it really, really fascinating. I was at a briefing not too long ago, about 2 weeks ago now, and there's a former congressman that was there that used to be on the Intel committee, and he gave a fascinating briefing that made so much sense. What actually could explain, again, I'm an armchair quarterback because I don't know on the inside, but it could explain some of the Intel failure. It might not necessarily been a failure. They're just looking at the wrong things, maybe through a bit of a funnel. And that is when you look at Russia's technology that they deployed, their ships, their tanks, their missiles, everything they have is extremely high tech, like the Moskva. The Moskva was an extremely high tech cruiser. What he was saying was the biggest challenge that they're having is no one's trained. And so when you don't have training and you don't know how to shoot the guns you have and the bullets you have, that's a problem.
There's another comment I'd like to make, and that has to do with the fact that we collectively ignore history. So I was on the wrong side of the equation too, like as to, who would win. But then a friend of mine pointed out the starvation campaign that Stalin undertook in 1932 and 1933, because he wanted to collectivize the farmers. And Ukraine, as we know, has been called the breadbasket of Europe. There are lots of farmers and wealthy farmers, and they resisted. And so what he did, he had the KGB confiscate over 4 million Ukrainians starved to death. It must have been a horrible scene when you have like corpses on the street and emaciated people walking past. They couldn't remove the corpses because they didn't have the strength, and there were documented cases of cannibalism. That campaign really made the Ukrainians hate everything Russian.
Dan, you're really good at kind of seeing forward with how this plays out. Okay, Putin starts this, we're in Ukraine, it's affecting NATO, but obviously there's a lot of other players in here.
I mean, first of all, on the Intel side, we've got to get that right, because we're going to be assessing China's capacity to fight Taiwan and their plans and intentions, and Taiwan's ability to resist China. And the key is to see the world through China's eyes. Taiwan has to make themselves such a strong target, or such a hard target, I should say, that it would be prohibitively costly to China in terms of spilled blood and treasure to launch a military invasion of Taiwan. We didn't do that for Ukraine. The Biden administration said that there were two paths. One was diplomacy, the other was deterrence. Well, we didn't deter them. We threatened them with supporting an insurgency and economic sanctions. And that wasn't enough to deter Putin, because Ukraine is an existential threat to Russia for the reasons we described. Taiwan is an existential threat to China. Wants Taiwan back. That's their policy. And so you really have to go pretty far to make sure that Taiwan is safe and secure. And I think there are a lot of questions for us on the intel collection side, but also the policy side. Do we remove our strategic ambiguity? Or are we going to say that Taiwan is independent, that we will come to their assistance? President Biden said that way back 6 months ago, and then the administration kind of recalibrated and said we haven't changed from the Taiwan Relations Act. But these are things we need to be talking about. I'm sure there is a lot of discussion behind the scenes, but eventually we're going to need to be public about what our policies are. And I think that time's running out.
How do you see things playing out with what Putin's doing? Dan was saying this is such a long game, that we're going to be doing. And what do you see as the future? I mean, can you look down a month, 2 months, years? What do you think?
I agree that this war is not going to end anytime. Putin cannot return without having the ability to declare true victory in some way. Zelensky has made it clear that he will not give up any territory. So, and we got a stalemate here, and God forbid, and it's still possible that Putin actually overcomes resistance and occupies a larger chunk or all of Ukraine. It's still not over, because then you're going to have a guerrilla war going on, because if Ukrainians hated Russians and Russia before, they hate him even more because sons, daughters, and brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers were killed by Russian soldiers. And so what that would look like Afghanistan 2.0, except much worse. And as we know, Afghanistan started the collapse of the Soviet Union and that was the Soviet Union, for crying out loud, and Afghanistan was significantly weaker than Ukraine is. So there's no good outcome for Putin here, I believe.
What do you think, Dan?
I totally agree. This is a loss for everybody. I like to say Ukraine's winning. They're not winning. They've lost too many innocent civilians, 5.5 million people displaced from their homes. It's a humanitarian catastrophe, and Putin started it. And I am so deeply fearful that the darkest days are ahead of us on this one.
Really?
Yeah.
So with dark days ahead, it makes us return and think of family. And we could keep talking about this forever, but I think people like us and people that are serving and being of service to others in country and community, we have to acknowledge and think about the support we either have or don't have for families. So Jack, what did your family know or think about what you did or didn't do? And what kind of support did they lend you?
No, you're going all the way back to...
We're going back, Jack.
My mother never... I told her 2 consecutive lies. One was when I stopped doing the teaching at university, which I had started. I told her that I was going to be a diplomat, and then eventually when I was moved to Moscow, she came to visit me, and well, that was a no-no, really. And so when I was launched to the United States, I told her that I rediscovered my love for chemistry, and I joined space exploration in a highly secret place in Kazakhstan, interestingly enough. And this became sort of everybody who used to be friends of mine or classmates, they all knew I was in Kazakhstan. And when I didn't return after the wall came down, the rumor came up that somebody brought that up, that I perished in a rocket accident in Kazakhstan. And I got married in Germany, and my wife actually knew where I was going and what I was doing. And she married me knowing that we would apart for about 10 years, if not longer. But any detail, she didn't know any details either. So now then I also had a family in the United States, and they didn't know until I told them. I told my wife at a time when the FBI had a bug in our kitchen and they were listening to my confession. and my daughter and my son, I told them when they turned 18. But the danger was already far gone, except when I was telling my wife, the FBI was still investigating me, so they had my confession on tape.
The compelling thing I love about Jack's story is he grew up an atheist with as he describes, the fairy tales of this guy called Jesus, and he actually became a Christian when the propaganda stopped and he could actually do his own research in life, which is fascinating. For myself, I was lucky enough to... When I got married, I was already in the Marine Corps. I just became a brand new second lieutenant. My wife knew my passion for service, and she came along on that ride with me. And when the FBI came along, the same thing. I'd say probably for my wife, the greatest challenge is that I was very grateful for her being tolerant of. I did a lot of undercover work because it was illegal for me to approach, our targets, our GRU officers, as that's what I worked in our true name. And so I got a lot of late nights with not a lot of explanations. And as a matter of fact, I think this is my 3rd or 4th wedding ring because I kept losing them. That was stressful. And my kids didn't even know who this strange guy was, especially during 9/11 New York, because I was never home. And so I was very grateful for her allowing me to do that. So I hunkered down and started doing what I wound up doing for the rest of my career. But I was very fortunate that I had a lot of support. And I left, I won't say the best, but I think Dan's story is the best. So I left that for last.
I don't know if it's the best. I could sit and listen to Jack. I can listen to Jack's story. Jack's story is so out of the ordinary, to say the least, for us.
It's bizarre.
It's extraordinary, real life, like cloak and dagger espionage. That's just incredible. But my story, my late wife, Kim, she was a disguise technician at CIA. So think Mission Impossible or the Americans, all those cool disguises. We did better than that at CIA. And she was somebody, she owned a beauty salon, had gone to cosmetology school. And after 9/11, like so many people, she said, I want to go serve. And the beauty of the intelligence community is, we hire so many people from different backgrounds. We got doctors, lawyers, and even, beauticians. And so my wife was doing disguise, and that's how we met. I was processing for disguise before going overseas, and completely by chance I met her. I always tell people that the best thing I ever did at CIA was not recruit a source or some other, whatever, stop a terrorist attack or whatever. No, it was meeting my wife. Honestly, the most consequential thing I ever did. And she put up with a lot. I did it unaccompanied, 3 years unaccompanied, a year in the Middle East and Iraq, a couple of years in South Asia, and Russia. And it's not the kind of places that she was super excited about, or nor was she excited about the fact that I was away. My son was 2. I was traveling overseas a lot. I was running the CIA's Near East division. And my wife and I, she would always take me to the airport. Of course, the government pays for you to get a cab to the airport, but my wife would always take me so we could give each other one last hug and kiss at the airport and tell each other we loved each other. And we always took my little boy with us because, you're not going to leave him at home. He's 2 years old. So the kid would go home screaming like, I want to go to the airport. And he thought that's where I was for a week, in the airport, because he didn't understand I was going places. And it kind of rips your heart out, to leave behind your family. And we like to say, oh, we're doing good things overseas and we're serving our country, and our kids will understand. Well, you're going to miss a lot. And I'm like you guys, I'm proud of my service and regret every minute I spent away from my family, especially when, you realize like time is precious. My wife was diagnosed with cancer 2 months before I retired. And so my retirement, the first 4 years of it was her fighting a losing battle against cancer. And so sometimes those are the cards you get dealt. You don't always have as much time as you wish you would have. And the time we give up because we're serving our country and deploying overseas in harm's way, which is hard enough for our family members to go through. But then when you're actually done with that, there's no guarantee that you're going to have all the time that you thought you were going to have to spend, your golden years together. So I always tell people, every day you wake up next to your loved one or loved ones, you got kids, man, those are days to cherish.
Hey Dan, thanks for saying that I led an extraordinary life. I'm not the author of that life. I just stumbled through it. But I just wanted to add a couple of things, because tomorrow is my real birth. My daughter could write a book under the title "My Daddy Has Two Birthdays," because
it's a good next title.
Because I was born in May, but my passport shows November, and the reason we had to change that. If I had Jack Barsky, as per his birth certificate that we stole, I was born in 1944, and that 44 would have been no good, because the FBI would have helped me if I had kept that birth year. Would have helped me to commit a crime, because I would have cheated the Social Security system. So, all kinds of weird things.
Wow. Keep going, Robin. Ask him another question.
So Jack's story, it's so funny. When I talked to Jack on my show, I met him on another podcast a number of years ago now, and I picked up his book, Deep Cover. I am not a spy book reader guy. It's not my thing. As you all know, when you live the life and you're doing this, you're like, whatever, some other book. But I picked this up because I wanted to chat with Jack, and it was so compelling because of these stories. The spy stuff was good. And speaking of that, and I say it all the time, I worked with individuals that were like Jack on the GRU side, and he was so used at a high level and so highly trained because of what he did. It was compelling. I mean, he was, when you work in this world, you have the residency officers that are the symmetrical threat, the guys that are in diplomatic cover and they're high tempo, high ops. And then you have the deep cover people, the undercover folks that Jack was, and they're generally kind of passive. They're looking for opportunities to slowly weave their way in. They're really the break glass in case our diplomats get expelled guys. And yet Jack was utilized more like an operational high tempo guy inside the residency, which I found really compelling and really interesting. I want to make sure we get in Maureen Farmer's great question, because it made me really reflect and think, and I think each of us did on this as well. What surprised you most in your career? And so Jack, since we're doing the pounding on Jack right now, Jack, what surprised you most in your career that you did not expect?
That was right at the beginning. And after I accepted the offer for employment. I thought I was in and I would be treated very well, mighty KGB. And, I had great hopes. I was still on probation. I had two tests I had to pass. The first one was probably the toughest. So I arrived in Berlin with a suitcase and a briefcase and had my secret meeting with my new handler, and I expected him to, show me to my new apartment, right? Well, he told me that your first task is to find yourself a place to live. That was in East Germany at a time where there was a shortage of living space, and all living space was controlled by the government. There was no way to go just rent someplace. So I wound up, out in the suburbs in an outbuilding that had a bed, a chair, running cold water, and a cold stove. That was my home for about 6 months until my boss decided that, I also had to pass the other test. It was a trip to West Berlin. That really wasn't a big deal, but I didn't realize that there were people who failed that test too, because, you're in enemy territory and you pee your pants. So imagine, I quit university, I quit a phenomenal career, and I could have failed either one of those tests and they would have sent me wherever.
Dan?
I think what shocked me the most was the impact of our intelligence, that the intelligence could impact major foreign policy decisions, the United States relationship with another country, or could impact the security and safety of our citizens. And likewise, a failure on our part could do the same. We have had our fair share of great successes. Many of them are still secret. We've also had failures like 9/11. But that's really what I really felt, that, we all shouldered a very significant responsibility there, because, it's just so extraordinarily important for the president to have the best intelligence we can give him in order to make the most informed decisions. The level of importance of our intelligence really even was just a surprise for me, being on the inside and just seeing it happen.
Yeah, I'm going to add that to mine as well.
May I add one more surprise?
Yeah, go ahead.
Because it's really delicious. It has something to do with a vestige of cultural ignorance. So I went to college in the United States. I got a bachelor degree. And, I was ambitious enough to, and it was good enough. I aced the whole thing. I had a 4.0 average. And so shortly after the last class, I was called into the dean's office. And the dean asked me, "So what are you going to say for your graduation speech?" I said, "What?" "Well, you're the valedictorian." That was a big surprise. I had no idea that was coming. Okay.
That was another great story from the book too. It's like, here's Jack. He's supposed to be this deep cover guy, being discreet with his persona and everything. Meanwhile, he's got to give the valedictorian speech because he got his degree. That was fantastic.
Okay,
that's a good one.
I do want to leave a final message for anyone that wants to share. It is Memorial Day. This is being released.
Yeah, I tell you, most Americans don't know how good they have it, and that's typical for people like me who are first generation Americans. We have a background. We know what we have here, and every time I go to the supermarket, I never fail to gawk at all the stuff in the store, like 20 different types of cereal, and I mean the football field size farmers market that we have in Atlanta. My God, I remember, in Moscow, the quote-unquote supermarkets, the only thing that was always available was canned fish and mineral water. Other than that, it was a guessing game. And this is such a rich country, and the folks that are trying to change it to something else, maybe after a European model or whatever, are, in my view, are criminals. That's a tough word, but it's true, because why do you want to change something that works so well for an entire country? That makes no sense.
I mean, look at the progress, and very rarely, if ever, do we move backwards from and back into the problems we had before. We're continually moving forward, but the way the genetics and biology of our brains work is we only keep seeing new problems. We forget where we came from. So I think days like Memorial Day are great times to remember where we came from. Dan?
Yeah, I always, think about Memorial Day. The bookend holidays for Memorial Day are Mother's Day and Father's Day. And, that's the time when we remember the sacrifices families make, the ultimate sacrifice in too many cases. And my sons and I always take a moment and reflect on those whom we lost. But, this year, we're also going to reflect on some of the sources we lost, those who stole secrets on our behalf to keep our soldiers safe. There was one source in particular, and I've written a column about this, which will be out on Memorial Day. He saved a lot of soldiers in the war zone. And it was his intelligence reporting. He was a penetration of a terrorist network. He was killed. He wasn't killed because of any failure of tradecraft. He was killed because he was in a war zone. And our young case officer who was meeting him had to watch actually his body being washed and prepared for burial according to the Islamic faith. It's counterfactual history, but I'll be thinking about him and all the lives he saved and how he gave an ultimate sacrifice too on our behalf. And as an intelligence officer, and I think all three of us can understand that especially well because we know the value of intelligence. We lived it. I think it's important to keep that in mind as well on Memorial Day, this most sacred of holidays.
Absolutely, Dan. Thank you for sharing that. Thank you all of my best friends, Jack. Gentlemen, I want to thank you all for spending time today, sharing with the audience your incredible insights and how intelligence really works, that it's behind the scenes of intelligence is us. It's real people doing real things. It's actually doing what Dan was saying, seeing the world through Russia's eyes, through China's eyes, through Putin's eyes, which is empathy. I think if people that know each one of us individually and collectively, we do what we did because we have massive empathy for those we love and care about, as well as everyone else that we touched. Because empathy doesn't mean you agree with someone. Empathy means you try to understand life from their optic and their perspective so you can communicate effectively, forge the trust you need to solve problems, because ultimately that's what people that are in leadership positions do. They should be solving problems. And hopefully with this new knowledge you all have today about, one, how to forge great connections and trust with others, understand a geopolitical paradigm a little bit more so you can make great, healthy choice decisions for you and your families, and honor Memorial Day for what it should be, and that is for those that sacrifice for the great things we have in life. With that, gentlemen, I want to thank you all. The Troika is signing off.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Forged by Trust. If you enjoyed the show, took away a few new tools, I hope you will leave a great review of the show to show your support. If you are interested in more information about how to forge your own trust-building strategies, please visit my website at www.peopleformula.com. You can also follow me on my social media sites included in the show notes. I'm looking forward to sharing my next Forged by Trust episode with you soon.